So you heard about an air hockey video game from Alpharad, Ludwig, or some other big creator, or perhaps you stumbled into it yourself, but you played a game and are completely overwhelmed. Don't worry. This is normal, all of us go through it, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. With these 9 tips, you'll be collecting MVPs in no time. If you already understand the concept of the game, you can skip ahead to part 2, but there is nothing quite like this that has existed before, so you may want to stick around. You will hear people describe this game as air hockey, football, 2D Rocket League, a sporty MOBA, and so many other things. I've even heard someone liken parts of the game to Stardew Valley of all things. While this might help paint a picture, it doesn't describe at all what the game is. In Mega Strikers, you play as one of 3 strikers on a team, and you need to get the core, the ball-like thing, into the enemy team's goal. To aid you in this, you have abilities unique to your character. In its simplest form, that is what a Mega Strikers is. There is, of course, more to it than that though. For instance, you will join a game in one of 2 positions, forward or goalie. The goalie's job is the simplest. You need to protect your goal. You will typically stand in your goal area, this darker coloured section or near to it, and will spend most of your time trying to clear the core away from your goal and towards the enemy one. There are 2 forwards on each team, and their job is to score without letting the enemy get a chance to score themselves. You must work together to secure control of the core and find a gap in the enemy's defence to score. Before you can score though, there are goal barriers that you need to hit with the core. They all look different, and here are just a few of them. When you hit a goal barrier with the core, it will disappear, and when you hit the last goal barrier with the core, the goal will slowly start to open. Now you can actually try and score a goal. Good luck. Okay, at this point in the video, you know the absolute basics. If you struggle to take in lots of information all at once, pause here, play a bot or AI game or 2, and then come back for the rest. Before we get on to tip number 2, something you will have noticed in your games is that everyone has a health bar that goes down as you get hit by enemy abilities. This is known as your stagger bar, and if you're really unlucky, you will already know that if something hits you off the edge of the map, you actually die in the game and have to wait a few seconds on the sidelines. When your stagger bar, this health thing, hits 0, you will become really easy to knock off, so be careful. You can pick up these little glowing orbs to refill your stagger bar, so keep an eye out for those if you are low. So, you know what the game is now, and you've jumped into a match and felt completely overwhelmed. Knowing what the game was didn't help. This game is too much for you, and there is no way you could ever keep up with everything that's going on in this game. You are not alone. This happened to me and the dozen or so friends I've introduced to the game. Literally everyone I know has felt overwhelmed at the beginning. There is so much going on. This is normal, don't worry. My biggest beginner tip might sound a bit cliched, but they are cliches for a reason. Take it one game at a time. When you find a striker you like, try to stick to just that striker for a while so you aren't learning new abilities all the time. Ignore whatever a core flip is, at least for the first handful of games, and pretend awakenings don't exist at all, whatever the hell those are, and try to stick to just one role if you can. Sadly, you can't control the map you will get. Some of them are more crazy than others, just focus on you if you can. Try to take one learning point from each game. In fact, if you can, go into a game knowing what you want to take from it. Perhaps next game you want to focus on how often you can strike the core, as that has a limit. Perhaps you want to practice on how your abilities will affect the core. Maybe you want to try and knock off or KO a player. Whatever it is, focus on one thing per game at the start. That will help the game be less overwhelming, and after a handful of quick 5-minute games, you will suddenly know many of the basic skills and can start focusing on the game as a whole. It's going to be a lot to take in all at once, so don't. Start simple, learn over a number of games, and you won't regret it. Even though you have the right mindset for coming at this game now, you still might not be confident enough to jump into player matches, let alone competitive play. And for exactly that reason, my 3rd tip for new players is to play the game mode that you find most comfortable for learning in. If you click here on the home screen, you can select between a bunch of different game modes. If nothing happens when you click this yet, that's because after the tutorial you're forced to play I think 3 bot games. The other 5 players in these games will all be AI controlled and toned down to give you a chance to learn, so don't worry about these games, just go have fun. Before you queue for a regular game, make sure you select the role you would like to play. You can also do this from the homepage. Forward and goalie roles will put you in that role, and flex means that you'll randomly be assigned either one of them. When you're choosing your game mode, the versus AI option here will match you with other real players on your team against AI controlled opponents. The AI isn't that smart, but it's competent enough to give you a chance to learn and understand the game. I recommend starting here if you want to experiment more, or if you still want to focus on the different skills one at a time. Quick play is the next step up. These are games with 6 players, 3 on each team, actual player matches, and the first team to 5 goals wins. There's also randomly assigned buffs called Awakenings that all players have, which I haven't brought up on purpose yet. Ignore that they exist still. Quick play matches tend to be super short and are very informal. If you just want fun, this is the game mode for you, and especially if you're still learning, it can be useful to have that sort of short 5-minute blast. Normal is probably the game mode I queue for the least. It uses the same rule set as competitive, so I will introduce them both here, and I typically just play competitive if I want to play this rule set. 6 human players battle in a race to win 3 sets. To win 1 set, you need to score 3 goals before the enemy team do. At the start of the game, everyone chooses from 1 of 2 awakening buffs for themselves, but not all players will have to choose the same one. Between each of these sets, players take turns picking a new awakening buff for themselves, in a sort of roguelike element to the game. The only real difference between normal and competitive is that in the latter, your rank will change based on how you perform. I do like competitive, building up your character can feel fun, but I didn't touch it until I was a few days into the game, and I would recommend the same for anyone else. Tip number 4 is a quick one. There are a couple of settings you absolutely have to change, and a couple of recommendations. In settings, go to the controls section, and for the love of God swap to WASD please. MOBA controls will force you to miss goals and even score own goals. As early as possible, swap to WSD and learn the game that way. There really isn't much of a conversation for MOBA, it's just bad, and part of me wishes that they would remove it entirely, but I'm sure it's useful for some players. Just almost definitely not you. While you're in there, you can also change your cursor size too. This is another one that I would heavily recommend. It's easy to lose your cursor in the chaos, so mine is large, but anything bigger than the smallest setting is probably useful. The final control setting I would recommend changing is your secondary. By default, this is on left shift. Personally, I just found spacebar way easier, but swap the keybinds around to suit how you play other games for maximum comfort. In the general settings window, there is also a gameplay section. This lets you change a number of things from seeing ability ranges to auto-firing abilities when stunned, and indicating where your strikes are going to go. If you want a full guide on this, let us know in the comments, but this is the happy medium that I have found, so I can recommend this setup. So you've got the mindset, you know what the game is, you've been playing AI games, and your settings are correct, but the game is still way too hard to understand. The issue here might be your choice of striker. Not all strikers are as easy to play as others, and this doesn't mean the strikers I'm about to list are for noobs though. It just means they are forgiving to newer players. Some of these actually see play at the highest level of competition in the game, so don't worry about who you pick from this list, just know that I recommend these as strikers to begin with. If you want to pick up forward, without a doubt, my number 1 suggestion for new players is Juno. Juno throws out little blobs with each of her abilities that will sort of automatically try to eat the core and fire it at the enemy goal or goal barrier. Your primary throws a blob in a line, which will knock back anything it hits and leave a blob at the end. Your secondary will have you leap into the air, dodging damage as you go, and will leave a blob where you left off. And your special, or ultimate, as 99% of people call it, sees you throw out 1 blob plus 1 blob for each enemy in a massive area. Worst case scenario with Juno, the enemy players keep walking into your blobs, removing them from the field, but even this does damage to the enemy and slows them down. Juno just provides so much value even when you aren't 100% sure what you're doing. Just throw blobs out in an area you think will be useful, and try to learn the other parts of the game as they score for you. For Juno forward, I would take Magnetized Souls for your gear of choice. As I mentioned, there is a lot more to these characters. If you want to know how the pros pilot Juno or any of the others, there was actually a Juno in the first pro finals I just saw, then let me know in the comments and I can work on that video for you. Also, if you've made it through all of these tips so far, if you have enjoyed the video or found it useful, can you do me a huge favor and drop a like? That will let me know that you're enjoying this. Thank you very much. Okay, so maybe Juno doesn't sound like your kind of thing. when it comes to teaching forwards to friends, they seem to fall into two categories: Juno enjoyers and speed demons. If you want to go fast to make flashy plays, you actually start the game with Kai unlocked, and he is perfect for learning how to outplay an opponent. Kai's secondary ability makes him super fast for a short period of time. You can use this to run the core into the enemy goal, dodge enemy abilities, or recover from bad positions, and so much more. His primary fires a handful of little fireballs in a straight line. This is best used to push the core past an enemy, as each little hit will be hard for the enemy to fight back against, and it is the perfect goal scoring ability. His special is a huge fireball fired in a longer line that deals massive damage at the end or on the first enemy hit. This can be used on the core, but is usually most effective at knocking enemy players off the map. For Kai's forward gear, I would also take the Magnetized Souls. Okay, that's forwards for you. Juno for jumpers, Kai for speedsters, but what about goalies? Kai is an option again. If you are a forward who plays Kai and you have to play goal, perfect. He can be a little unforgiving if you're out of position, but with the simple kit you can focus on other elements of the game too. For goalie gear, you'll probably want Strike Shot to make your projectiles fast enough to save goals. I can definitely recommend Kai to anyone who wants to start learning goal. Luna might seem like a strange pick. She is tiny and struggles to cover the goal, but I think with such a clear playstyle, you can bring great value to the team even as you learn the game. Luna is an aggressive goalie, and by putting pressure on the enemy forwards with your artillery, you will find more time to think about your saves and to think about how you want to play the game. Her primary ability fires a rocket in a straight line, dealing damage. You can use this to save, but with such a short cooldown on this ability, I find myself 99% of the time just firing this at the enemy striker that has the core to disrupt them and try to kill them. Your secondary is a dash that covers the entire map. Be careful with it, you can press W and S to move up and down, but it's really hard to control. The best idea is just aim where you want to go and fire. Only use this in goal if you take the correct goalie gear. For Luna, we take eject button, which after using your secondary will let you press it again to return to where you jumped from. This lets you dash into the enemy lines on Luna, try to score a goal or pass to an ally, and then teleport right back to goal again. Lastly, her special is a huge circle of damage. Throw this at the enemy goal as they try to defend, or try to kill enemy forwards that get too close to the edge. If you want a more traditional sort of big boy to stand in front of the goal, then Dubu is an honourable mention of mine here. You might just find that he gets outmaneuvered with his really slow secondary, so be careful with that. Okay, if you've got this far and you still feel overwhelmed, feel free to watch the rest of the video, but just focus on those first few tips. Once you are comfortable that you can at least slightly follow the game, then you are ready for these next tips. Scoring is kind of required to win the game. No matter what mode you play, you do need to eventually score. But that enemy goalie is a problem. They can always read where you're sending it, and it's just unfair. If that's the case, then you have two secret weapons up your sleeve. Both weapons require you to understand how your strike, for WASD users that's left click by default, works. Your strike, as it is called, has a short cooldown. Try this in your next game. Left click as fast as you can, as often as you can, and you'll see that you only strike about once every second. This means that both you and your enemy after striking are vulnerable. The first option is the easiest. Strike the core into the enemy goal, and just as the enemy goalie strikes it to safety, fire an ability at the core that will knock it in again. This is how 90% of goals get past me, being a goalie main, and will be the key to many of your future victories. The enemy can, if they're quick enough, fire an ability of their own to save it, but they have far less time to react than you will, and if they fail, you score a goal. The second option requires patience and a little luck. If the core is heading towards the enemy goal, natural instinct will tell you to hit it so it gets there faster and potentially you get the goal. However, if you let the core slowly head into the enemy goal without touching it and just follow along with it, you will force the enemy goalie to strike it to safety. If you're positioned correctly, the second that goalie strike is on cooldown, you can just strike it back yourself and score an easy goal. This does work for scoring goals, but it's also an important part of the game as a whole. The person who strikes second always wins. Remember that, and you'll win pretty much every 1v1 in the lower levels of the game. Tip number 7 is more of a public service announcement than a full tip by itself, because when you hear it, you'll think to yourself, yeah, that's a no-brainer, of course. But I have lost track of the number of times I have seen this happen and result in disaster. To win the game, You don't actually really need to score. You just need to make sure your enemy never does. With a perfect defense, your enemy will eventually falter and let a few goals slip past them. This does not mean play with 3 goalies though. My biggest pet peeve in the entire game is forwards standing on top of me as a goalie. Don't go do your job, that's not a tip, that's a request, that's an order. The tip, however, is that you just need to keep the core away from the enemy players to win. If an enemy sends the core towards you, don't just engage them in a click off and try to force it past them, because that means you're giving them control of the core again, and they might do something far more clever than you. Instead, pass to your friend, or pass to the wall away from the enemy. Do anything but give it back to them. This tip goes doubly for goalies. Every time you save the goal but pass it straight back to an enemy striker, you have achieved nothing. You'll have to try to save again, and eventually they will win. Pass above them to the little horizontal bars either side of the goal, or pass to one of your players who have come back to help. Anything but passing right back to the enemy. Master this, and your win rate will skyrocket. But Greg, I hear you say, you haven't even mentioned one of the buttons we get to press. That bar underneath my stagger health, what does that do? Well, I left it until tip 8 because everything before this is far more important for you to learn than the core flip. Yes, it is one of the buttons you get, but I advise you just not press it until you master at least the first 5 tips. The core flip by default I believe is on Q for WASD users, and is only available when that second bar is full and changes from its normal colour to what I think is blue. I'm not sure, I'm colourblind. When that bar is full and you press Q, when the core is near you, the core will come to an immediate stop. Enemies will be pushed back a little, and your next strike on the core will fire it at exceptional speeds. This is a great skill to use for saving and scoring goals, and should be used in those key moments when nothing else will suffice. To make that bar go up, you just need to strike the core or collect those little orbs that spawn around the map. As a side note, and please do not focus on this yet, this comes into play much later on when you've played the game a whole bunch, you can press Q before that bar is full, and it will let you dodge enemy abilities. This is not important until enemies actually start being competent, which won't happen at least for a few days as you play the game. Finally, the last tip of this guide is what do you do with awakenings? As you learn the game, especially if you're in quick play, just ignore them. Once you're comfortable with most of the tips that we've gone over today, read through the awakenings that you get each game, and try to feel out which ones are good for the strikers you play. Maybe one of the awakenings say they do something good for impact, haste, or projectile abilities. And well, if you click on the little eye on your character in the screen, or if you go to the details panel in the striker menu, it will tell you which abilities use these keywords. Pair keywords on awakenings with keywords on striker abilities, and you'll be off to a good start with awakenings at least. From there, start trying to recognize maybe one awakening per game. Let's say prime time, you've had that before. It has prime in the name, so it has something to do with primary. You're correct. It gives you a second charge of your primary, perfect for strikers that like to spam their first ability, like Drakkar or Luna. If you would like a more in-depth guide on awakenings, you know where to go. Let me know in the comments, and thumbs up the comment that you want to first see as a video. That will help guide me as to which ones to make. And that concludes our beginner's guide to Omega Strikers. I hope that helps you dive in and enjoy the game.